Welcome to the Missouri Catholic Conference from the Capitol podcast, where we take a deeper look at the social and political issues facing Missouri and the church. I'm your host and executive director, Jamie Morris. Today, we're discussing a side of abortion that is all too often forgotten about in our culture at times: the lingering pain and guilt felt by women and men after an abortion. How do individuals and couples find healing and hope post-abortion? And what services are offered by the church to help those who are wounded by abortion? Today, we're blessed to be joined by Linda and Chuck Raymond to share their personal story of pain and healing after their abortion in 1976. Linda and Chuck have shared their personal story at men and women's post-abortion healing retreats, with youth groups, at parish events, and at other life-affirming events. Their testimony has been shared in the St. Louis Review, the Riverfront Times, and EWTN. They are members of Holy Infant Catholic Church in Baldwin, Missouri, where they currently reside. Thank you so much today for coming and sharing your story with us. Oh, it is our pleasure. And, I guess as we start with your story, and I do really just want to, kind of open it up to you to share your story with us. If you just want to start from the beginning, how did the two of you meet, and, how did that relationship develop, and then into, your experience with abortion?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Okay. We met in high school. Actually, we went to different high schools, at McDonald's Hamburgers. McDonald's Hamburgers was right between our two high schools, and so that's where we met in the summer of '74. And it was an exciting time, hard work, but we enjoyed working together as a crew, and just developed really good close friendships. With the crew, and we began to do a lot of just activities as teenagers, after work, after closing, and things like that. And as a few months went by, then Linda and I started pairing off, and by 6 months later, we were formally dating, and enjoying our time together.
Very good. And then, and Linda, I'm sorry, I
It's
don't mean
okay.
to interrupt.
No, he told it well. We definitely had a group of friends that we were working with at McDonald's, and like Chuck said, we became more exclusive and dating, just the two of us. And like he said, it was just a fun, fascinating time, having our first jobs and all that. And so we became pretty close. So yeah.
And then, if you don't mind, then, at that point, then, kind of how did you then, things got serious, it sounds like, and then,
Okay.
if you just want kind of go from there.
So we became an exclusive couple, and we're dating more and more. And I was a senior in high school. Linda was a freshman in college, local college. So we were working together. And I think from the time that we really committed to each other, that we wanted to have our goals of going to college and finish schooling and then get married. I think from that time, from my perspective, it feels like our intimacy got more intense, and I think our guard kind of went down,
Okay.
and we kind of went through the slippery slope of our activity, to the point where we had sex on one evening, and Linda was pregnant. That was a very devastating news. When people talk about an unplanned or a crisis pregnancy, that is exactly what it felt like. It was a crisis, and I describe it as being a period of temporary insanity, because we were alarmed, we were ashamed, we were fearful of what our parents would say, what others would say, and we didn't really have a clue as to what to do.
Right. It was pretty scary time. Just knowing how I predicted that my parents would feel was really frightening. I couldn't possibly approach them with it. So I remember going over to Chuck's house and calling him outside so I could tell him that I was pregnant. And it was pretty devastating. So from there, and I had been having all the common morning sickness and all those kind of things, and trying to hide it from my parents. And my mother finally confronted me and said to me, she said, because I was deciding, I was too sick to go to school one day. And she's like, why aren't you going to school? And I told her I had the flu and I, tried to cover it up. And she got to the bottom of it and she was very, very upset. Um, and told us, told me that, there's no way you can be a teenager and have a baby. You're not going to be able to carry it to term. Your future will be ruined and all that. So then shortly after that time frame, and our parents had never met each other. So we had been dating pretty seriously for about a year and a half by then.
Okay.
Now, granted, I had been over to his home several times and I loved his parents. They loved me. And Chuck, same
Yeah.
thing. He'd come over to, hang out with our family. It was all good, but our parents had never met. So on this very just crazy first time meeting, we met at a restaurant and our four parents sat at a table and then we sat at a table next to them, the two of us, and they just discussed kind of what the plan was going to be as if we weren't there. So it was, kind of like them deciding that this is the best choice for us so that we were going to have an abortion. So just devastated. And we didn't have anybody else we could turn to. We didn't have I didn't have a firm foundation in my faith at that point, and my parents were pretty loose with it as well. So I didn't have a minister or a pastor or a priest I could go to. I didn't have any friends, anybody with such a tragic piece of news. Um,
So yeah, this all happened really quickly
oh
in
yeah,
just a matter of a very few days, and that's part of, I think, the tragedy of these crisis or unplanned pregnancies is that you tend to, when you need to seek counsel and to get a broader perspective, then you don't, or we didn't. We were, again, I was 17, she was 18, very ashamed, and timid, and just didn't feel like I had much to say about what was going to happen, which in a way doesn't really make sense. But again, I was 17 and she was 18. Um, and so, this all steamrolled really quickly. Like Linda said, we didn't have or take an opportunity to get any other opinions other than this like snowball to you're gonna fix this problem and make it go away by having the abortion. And you know, it was on a cold day in January the 10th of 1976, that I drove over to her house. We got in her parents' van, and her mom, and then Linda in the middle, and me on the right side of a bench seat. And I just remember very somberly traveling to a Planned Parenthood abortion facility, and I had the cash ready. I was expected to pay. We walked in there. It was a pretty cold environment. They met you at the desk, and you paid right away, and then they kind of almost immediately separated Linda, and took her back. So I don't know if you want to pick it up from there.
um, yeah. The day, even starting off with it being a cold day in the winter, kind of set the tone because in the abortion facility at Planned Parenthood, like Chuck said, it was just an icy environment. Just no one friendly. Nobody asked how I'm doing. And then in the waiting room, all the other young ladies who were maybe there with boyfriends or parents or whomever, just silent and stone cold. Um, Nobody looking at each other. A lot of the ladies were already crying. A lot of young teenage girls like myself. Um, and yeah, the nurses pretty much whisked me away from my mom and from Chuck. And I immediately got put into a white gown and was told to go to a waiting room and wait until they called me. Um, yeah, I don't think I'll ever forget the sound of that roaring vacuum that suctioned that child from my womb. It was pretty devastating. Uh, and I honestly, I blocked it out for many years, many years. The images and the sight, sounds, and smells kind of thing to relate me back to that day. I blocked it all out for many years until I got with a really good counselor. So that's how I'm able to bring those images back right now. Is all the years that I had of counseling and therapy, um, to help me get really to the root of it. And that's that is one of the other devastations of abortion is that it's so hush hush, don't talk about it. It's such a sin that we bury it in our minds, and you can't remember in order to get to the wound and peel off the layers and get down and get healing.
Sure, and yeah, and could you kind of expand that? Because I've watched some of your your story and your testimony before for groups, and I just think it's very powerful. That sort of that pact of silence that you all have talked about before. Can you kind of just explain that to us? What you mean by that, and really how you addressed or didn't address this pain, for days, weeks, months, years
Yeah,
after
yeah.
the
I can pick it up.
abortion.
Go
I when you phrase it as pact of silence, I don't even remember, Chuck, if we ever like talked about, hey, we're not ever gonna. I
No.
think it was more of an unspoken,
Yeah.
like it was so painful and so deep and
Yeah.
dark, and we had been such sinners and had so much shame and guilt surrounding it that we just didn't talk about it. Um, you want to go
Yeah,
ahead?
that's how I
It,
remember
it
it.
was just
From walking out of that
Sure.
abortion clinic, we had convinced ourselves that this is what we had to do, that we didn't really have a choice, and and I have to admit, sadly, that when I left, I felt terrible, but I also felt a little bit of relief because okay, it's over. And now we can go back to the plan, go back to
Hmm.
graduating from high school and getting on to college and love Linda dearly, which I can say because it's been 48 years later from that point in time. Um, but it wasn't really a pact, Jamie, but we walked out of there and I guess unconsciously had this silence. It was not spoken of at all. It wasn't spoken of between us with our parents. Um, it was so shameful and so hard that we were individually trying to just crush it and block it out. And I shamefully think that I did that pretty well because shortly thereafter, this was in January. By June, I graduated from high school and I was off into the military, which I was in the military in military school for the next 5 years after that, and and so this inability to talk about it really manifested itself into a pretty serious communication problems. Our relationship, yeah, I'll pause and say it's very rare. A very small percentage of couples can actually make it through an abortion experience and not have a breakup. Whether they're married or they're not married or whatever their situation is, it's very rare. But I feel, thanks be to God, He kept us together, and but we didn't talk about it, and things percolated along. You might want to mention that during that time that I was away in New York at school, um, Linda struggled right away with some very serious bouts of depression, and was even suicidal and institutionalized for a while. You want to mention that
so
or?
yeah. So not only did I suffer the loss of my child, but then of course Chuck was away and far away in New York for 5 years. He would come home on summer vacation for a little bit of time and then Christmas, and that was it. So this deep, dark secret became a wound deep buried in my heart and just in my being that I just layered on silence, shame, guilt. Don't talk about it, and I think it just got inside of me so deeply that I couldn't talk about it. I wouldn't talk about it, and it got worse. But it got worse because it's just festering inside. Um, so Chuck mentioned, yeah, my mom finally caught on to, okay, there's something wrong with her. I remember coming home from class one day and telling my mother that I was running red lights and I didn't know why. I was driving home and I don't know, I was just being careless. And so she got concerned. And a couple of days later, she had called a psychiatrist who immediately put me into a psychiatric ward. Um, and I went through some intense therapy and medications and stayed there for about a week, got released. But that went on for many years. The cycle of antidepressants and medications to make me feel better and bury all this, and nobody. But that's what I was talking about before with this big wound festering inside of me. Nobody got to the heart of it. Nobody we didn't. I mean, I would go to this group counseling when I was that week in the hospital, and people would talk about things and their problems and stuff, and I never brought it up. I don't even remember what I was saying, but we never got to the abortion. So, like I said, this went on for many, many years, decades, until we got our real healing. But it's so many women suffer with that, just bearing that guilt. Um, it's just amazing, and I need to, that's one of our ministries now. We're reaching out to try to help people. Uh,
No, no, and I think that that's so needed. And so, what was sort of the breakthrough then? Because I mean, you're talking, years and decades of just kind of keeping this, inside. What was that final breakthrough that made you recognize that that there was a wound here that
Yeah,
needed
yeah. So
serious
that,
healing?
and that was a long, long journey, and you can look back on it and see all these points where, where God never gave up on us. We hung in there. We got married in 1981, so 5 years later we got married, and Linda would have these periods of being down and depression. We had, God blessed us with children. That was a huge um, just a gift that we both struggled with. In if I can communicate this, is that God had, even after what we had done, He trusted us enough to bless us with children, and that was beautiful, but also hard because my sweet wife would have these waves of low self-esteem and just never feeling worthy of being a mom, and that festered. I mentioned our communication issues. We couldn't talk about it. I would offhandedly wonder if that abortion was still in there psychologically, but we couldn't talk about it. And it was also challenging on other parts of our marriage because we didn't really talk about anything that was a conflict. Anything that was not just normal family business, and that grew to be a really a break in our marriage. And come along 25 years later or so, our marriage was broken. We had a complete lack of communication, bitterness, estrangement, anger, and again, another turning point or a God moment was that He tilted us towards some counseling as a couple, and that immediately started a pathway of healing. And alongside that time, for all these years, we got married in the Catholic Church, naively, ignorantly, having never confessed this, and never came up. Linda was raised Lutheran, but converted to Catholicism through a kind of an RCIA with an individual priest who was wonderful, but we never addressed this at all. Um, so it took all the way to getting through that counseling. We were blessed to go to a marriage encounter weekend, which was highly recommended and just wonderful. And that was really a bombshell to me to kind of kickstart me back into getting serious about my faith. I learned a lot. I got into some men's groups. I went on an Acts retreat. There's a whole nother beautiful story. But it just really brought me back to Christ. And at the same time that was happening, I was coming to recognize, wait a minute, there's an issue here. And I was able to get to reconciliation through that growth, but realized that Linda hadn't, for the abortion. And over that next, maybe even a couple more years, came to realize that I needed to lead the family towards that issue and have us, get the help. So one thing would lead to another. Our son, meanwhile, finishes high school. He decides he wants to go to the seminary. So he's in the Catholic seminary here in St. Louis, and his freshman college group is going to Washington, D.C. for the March for Life. And we're, again, pretty naive, pretty ignorant. We decide, with a little bit of trepidation, because it's still a very raw issue for us ever to talk about, that we're going to watch the coverage on EWTN. They're all going to wear these bright royal blue beanies. We'll be able to see them.
You'll see him amongst the crowd.
Right,
There won't be any problem. He'll
right.
you
So
know.
anybody who's
oh,
been there or seen it knows how silly that was. You want to tell the next part? Or?
Yeah.
so okay, so we're watching and thinking we're going to see Charlie and his group, and something that caught both of our attention and brought us to tears immediately is along the bottom of the screen was running an ad. Are you suffering with a past abortion? Call this number. Here's where you can get help. Blah blah blah. So basically, I don't know if we ended up watching the rest of the part of the march, but we got on the phone and called the 800 number, and within what, a month, we were in
Yeah.
Cincinnati, Ohio, on a Rachel's Vineyard retreat weekend, and just blew the doors off of me realizing, okay, I've been allowing this huge wound inside of me to just take over my life, and God had already forgiven me. I mean, He knows what we do. He knows our path. He knows that that was not an intentional act, and oh my gosh, just blew the doors off. And we went to this weekend and just got all the way to the bottom through scripture, through prayer, through a lot of loving priests and other leaders that were there. That have, most of them were also post abortive, so they knew your pain, they knew your agony, and it was a 3 day just monumental, drawing me back to my faith and finally forgiving myself,
Yeah.
which was that's the hardest thing. I mean, I could forgive my parents, I could forgive Chuck, I could forgive the others involved, but not myself. But that did happen that weekend. And so that started us on our healing.
Praise God. And Chuck, as you know, the father, as a man, what was your experience then? Were there other men at the weekend retreat? How was that? How were you accepted? What was your sort of
Sure,
experience
sure. And
at the
even going
retreat?
back a little from there, as I was coming to my faith, I was also recognizing in a better way my responsibility, my role as a father and as a husband. And it was very intense for me to realize I need to help my wife. I am the father of that child that we lost, and that was very difficult. And it is hard to grasp again and to get over. I've talked about our communication issues, but getting to that retreat was just almost indescribable. I mean, it was long and painful and agonizing to, as Linda said, you break open the wound and go to the very bottom of it, and re-expose. If you have like, I won't use that silly analogy, but yeah, there I was the only man that was there that had had an abortion with his partner. And so there was another couple
Okay.
there that the man was there to support his wife who had had an abortion previously. But it was extremely rewarding for me. It was I had really had no idea what kind of emotions that I would have, but it really allowed me to unburden my heart in a way that I didn't think was possible. I recognized that part of my personality had turned into this kind of cold, hard-hearted person. I was in the military, and so part of that was being a gung ho, hard-charging young officer. But there was a hardness there and a lack of ability to have compassion and understanding for the sufferings of other people, especially my wife. And so that retreat allowed me to experience the woundedness of the other women that were there and also experience them um, seeing me and my ability to, or my willingness to let that emotion come out. And it was surprisingly to me, but it was very healing for them because many had difficult relationships, broken relationships with men, and struggles with men since then. And so it was beautiful. It's such a well put together program. And there are a number of other similar kinds of retreats. And the idea of a weekend retreat focused on abortion healing is just a beautiful, beautiful blessing.
Yeah, and I guess that leads us to now, and so now you all have devoted your lives to kind of help to help those in similar situations, and so this may be too broad of a question, but I'll ask it anyway. But what? So now, what would you say to those? Because we know the statistics bear out that there very likely may be people watching, listening that are in that exact same position as the two of you were, as kids that have been living in silence, with this pain. What would you tell them, if you could?
Oh my gosh. There I would tell them seek out healing. Just even if it's deep and dark and it is painful to reach out and get help. But get healing. It's there's so many places you can go on the internet to even type in abortion healing. I can't remember the one that's here for the local. Type in,
We should, shouldn't we?
I know we should know abortion
Yeah.
healing, and I think you even type in your zip code, and there's place, there it pops up. There's just so many different programs out there that
Yeah.
lead to healing. Don't suffer any longer. It's God is waiting there for you to come and receive Him and come back to Him. There's forgiveness out there. There's mercy. There's great people that can help you feel like you're yourself again, like you're coming back to being whole again.
Yeah. And we're just so blessed, Jamie, these days to um, be able to be in a ministry of healing. And we're currently on a team that's in a retreat that's been developed here in the St. Louis Archdiocese, and it's a version of the Entering Cana. Is another healing retreat. They're very similar, but we're on the team with other, just beautiful people, men and women, and 1 or 2 times a year, we'll have a live retreat in which we're able to help women and men kind of unpack that experience and put the pieces back together with just the love and the mercy that Christ wants to offer all of us.
No, that's so great. And have you noticed, I mean, over the years, a greater, uptake on these, more men and more women coming to seek that healing and forgiveness? Because as I think I alluded to at the beginning of this, it just seemed like for the longest time that was sort of the aspect of abortion that just wasn't talked about as much. But now I think you're right that, there is just a wealth of opportunity in ministries in the church that allow couples to receive that healing. And have you noticed more individuals, taking advantage of that, through your time,
I would
working in
say
this
yes, but
ministry?
very slowly. I can tell you from our experience,
Hmm.
from my experience, that it took many years of kind of stewing on even the possibility of trying to get help. Because again, you're so ashamed, you've developed this huge darkness of denial and just putting it away. So it takes some unpacking of that to even get to the point where you might have the psychological courage to go try to find a website or to make a phone call. And that would be a message I would have is just start where you are. If you're in a faith or
Hmm.
in a church, to maybe mention it to a pastor or a deacon or a sister, or go online. There's if you type in abortion healing, after abortion or abortion hurts, there's some really great resources, and wherever you might be, able to connect is to start that ball and start that movement, in your soul.
No, very good. And I just can't thank you both enough for coming on, and not just for joining us today, but for your ministry and for being so willing to share your experience and story. Because I know it probably never gets easy, but is so much of a blessing for the church and for the community. Just thank you so much for being willing to put yourself out like that. And we're so happy that you could come on and share your story with us so that hopefully we can also help
Yeah, no,
amplify it a
no, you're
little
right. I
bit.
mean, it's never easy to tell the story, but even by your affirmation, it's we feel like the Holy Spirit's encouraging us that it is helping other people. And
Mhm.
we've had women come up to us and men come up to us after our talks just teary eyed and just want to share and want to get some help. So we realize every time we kind of suck it up and tell the story one more time that somebody's being helped, and hopefully also that we can help move the needle with the culture that still unfortunately thinks that abortion can be a solution, a right that a woman needs to have to be able to take care of a problem. And then what they don't realize is that it doesn't fix the problem. It just creates an enormous wound that can be devastating, and very painful.
And if I
Yeah.
No, if I can just
Oh, no, I'm
mention
sorry,
one
Linda.
thing
Go ahead.
in our closing, I feel like one of the most rewarding things for us, like Chuck mentioned, when we have a talk or we speak at a parish, is to even have one person come up to us afterwards. And this could be, I think recently we had a lady who was in her 80s and who had had an abortion, and she's just like, she told me, she said, I'm just like you. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, just reached out to her, and she said, I wish I had the courage. And I was trying to encourage her to go to healing and all that. So if
Mhm.
we reach out to a large crowd and one person responds, that's all we, that's our glory. That's giving the glory back to God for that person being brave enough to come and approach us. Um, I really appreciate you having us on today, and thanks for opening eyes and touching hearts with your topic today.
No, you're very welcome, and no, thank you all for what you do. We very much appreciate it and appreciate your ministry.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us. And this has been MCC from the Capitol. For more information on this and other topics, please visit our website at mocatholic.org. That is mocatholic.org. So from all of us here at the MCC, thank you for tuning in,
God
and
bless
God
you. Thank
bless.
you.
Thanks.